close on Nancy and John, standing in the middle of a blazing desert, nothing around them but split earth and brittle weeds. John grips a worn sheet of paper in his weathered hand, the edges fluttering in the hot wind. 25 years. That was the span of time Nancy and John gave, day after day, season after season, devoting themselves to the home and life of a man they didn't just work for, but loved like kin. And in return for that unwavering loyalty, they received the deepest humiliation two faithful hearts could endure. The moment their employer was laid to rest, the heir, the very child Nancy once rocked to sleep, forced them out with nothing but the clothes they wore and a single document. Not a dollar, not a gesture of gratitude, just a cold laugh and a deed to a barren stretch of desert, a place so hostile even weeds struggled to survive. People whispered that the old couple wouldn't last a month, that the desert would swallow them whole, leave them bleached by sun and erased by sand, forgotten. But what the arrogant heir failed to understand was this: the desert was not a sentence, it was an examination. And what Nancy and John would raise from that scorched soil would not merely be shelter, it would become so extraordinary that it reshaped the fate of the region and forced the world to reconsider what worthless truly meant. Before I reveal how Nancy and John transformed dust into dominance and left that heir drowning in regret, make sure you subscribe and leave a like, because today's story proves that loyalty, when rooted deep enough, can bloom where no one else dares to plant. Nancy Martinez was 70 years old when the life she had known for 25 years collapsed overnight. She had been 45 when she first stepped through the doors of the Miller estate in suburban Las Vegas, hired to manage housekeeping in the vast marble-floored mansion. A few months later, her husband John, 68 when this chapter begins, joined her as groundskeeper and general handyman. Where Nancy brought warmth and order to the interior, John brought strength and quiet skill to the sprawling acres outside. Together, they became indispensable. Old Mr. Richard Miller had built his fortune in real estate, shaping much of Las Vegas's commercial skyline during its booming expansion years. In business, he was known as relentless and strategic. At home, with those he trusted, he could be unexpectedly generous. Nancy and John were not merely staff members, they were pillars. When Richard's wife passed away, it was Nancy who steadied the household. She managed meals, schedules, guests, and silence. She made sure Richard remembered to eat when grief stole his appetite. She ensured he slept when sorrow threatened to undo him. She became the quiet glue that held the mansion together. John, meanwhile, tended to every inch of the estate. He trimmed hedges with precision, repaired aging plumbing without complaint, polished floors, maintained irrigation lines, and kept Richard's prized vintage cars humming like new. No task was beneath him, no hour too late. And when Richard's only son, Marcus, spiraled through rebellious teenage years, it was Nancy who stood in the doorway waiting for him past midnight. Nancy who mediated shouting matches between father and son. Nancy who pressed clean shirts for school mornings after nights filled with slammed doors. Marcus used to call her Aunt Nancy. He used to smile at her. Those were steady years, good years. Richard paid them fairly. He allowed them to live in a modest cottage on the edge of the property. He treated them with dignity. "Your family," he would say more than once. "It's in my will. You'll be taken care of when I'm gone." Nancy and John believed him. They saved what little they could from their wagers, but their real comfort rested in his promise. They had earned it. 25 years of unwavering dedication had to mean something. Then came the diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. Swift, merciless. Richard weakened by the week. The man who once commanded boardrooms could barely sit upright, and before anyone had truly accepted the reality of it, he was gone. The funeral unfolded beneath a slate-colored March sky. Nancy wept openly, grief carving deep lines across her face. She had lost more than an employer. She had lost a part of her life. Marcus, now 42 and a polished technology executive, appeared composed, almost detached. He delivered a rehearsed speech praising his father's business achievements, then left early, phone pressed to his ear. 3 days later, Marcus summoned Nancy and John to the main house. They approached with cautious hope. Surely this was when he would confirm what Richard had promised, that the cottage would remain theirs, that their future would be secure. Marcus sat behind his father's desk, Richard's desk, as Nancy would always think of it, dressed in an expensive tailored suit. His expression was clinical. "I'll be direct," he said.
I'm selling the estate. A developer offered $8 million. The closing is in 30 days. Nancy felt her stomach drop. Selling, but this is your family's home, she whispered. It's an asset, Marcus replied coolly, and a valuable one. John cleared his throat. And us, the cottage? My father said many things. He never amended the will. Everything transfers to me. I have no obligation to maintain unnecessary expenses. Your employment ends today. The words landed like blows. Nancy's breath shortened. We gave 25 years, she said softly. He promised. Promises aren't legally binding, Marcus answered. Then he produced an envelope. I'm not entirely without compassion, he added, sliding it across the desk. My father purchased land years ago. It's now yours. Think of it as severance. John's hands trembled as he opened it. A deed. 40 acres in the Nevada desert, 2 hours from Las Vegas. Nancy knew the region by reputation. Dry, unyielding, forgotten. Nothing thrived there. Marcus smiled faintly. My father used to say you were like roots, steady, grounded. Well, now you can return to the ground. That property isn't worth much, but it's yours. Vacate the cottage by Friday. Friday, Nancy's voice barely carried. That gives you 2 days. You don't own much. He stood, dismissing them without another word. They walked back to their small cottage in stunned silence. 25 years reduced to a handshake and dust. Every birthday spent in service, every repair made in rain or heat, every promise trusted, all meaningless to Marcus. 2 days. 2 days to pack an entire life. That night, Nancy wept against John's chest. I held him when he was a baby, she whispered. John had no answer. He simply held her tighter, his own heart splintering, mind racing through impossible calculations. They were 70 and 68, not young enough to start over easily, not old enough to surrender, and far too proud to let Marcus see them shattered. Friday morning arrived faster than either of them wished. They loaded their belongings into their aging 30-year-old Ford pickup truck. Their entire existence barely filled the bed. Clothes stuffed into garbage bags in place of suitcases, a modest dresser, 2 worn chairs, a single lamp, kitchen utensils boxed in cardboard, framed photographs, the most precious cargo of all. Pictures of Nancy's long-deceased parents, memories that could never be replaced. Clothes on Nancy and John standing in the middle of a scorching desert, surrounded only by cracked earth and dry brush. John holds an old paper in his hand. Pictures of John's family from Mexico, pictures of them together, young and hopeful, decades ago. They'd accumulated so little in 25 years. Most of their life had been spent in service to others, living in provided housing, using provided furniture. Now they were seeing how small their footprint had been, how invisible they'd remained. A security guard named Tony stood watching them pack. Tony had known Nancy for 5 years. She'd made him lunch when he worked long shifts, asked about his daughter, treated him like family. Now he wouldn't meet her eyes. He was just doing his job, making sure the servants didn't steal anything on their way out. You can't take that lamp, he said when John loaded it into the truck. That's a state property. I bought this lamp 7 years ago, Nancy said quietly. At Target. I have the receipt somewhere. I'll need to see it. Nancy found the receipt in a box of papers. She'd kept every receipt, every document organized as always. Tony barely glanced at it before nodding. The humiliation of it burned. After 25 years of trust, they had to prove they owned a $15 lamp. Marcus didn't even come out to say goodbye. His car was in the driveway. Nancy could see it through the garage window, but he stayed inside. Couldn't even manage a final word to the people who'd raised him, who'd cared for his father, who'd kept his home running for a quarter century. Nancy wanted to scream at the injustice of it, wanted to pound on that door and demand he look at what he was doing, but she kept her dignity. She'd learned long ago that dignity was sometimes all you had left, and no one could take it from you unless you gave it away. She walked through the mansion one last time, her footsteps echoing on floors she'd mopped countless times. She ran her hand along the banister she'd polished weekly for 2 decades. She looked at the kitchen where she'd prepared thousands of meals, where she'd celebrated holidays, where she'd comforted Marcus through breakups and disappointments. This place held her history, her sweat, her time, her love. And now it wasn't even safe to take a lamp without ownership. John found her standing in the kitchen, tears running silently down her face.
He didn't say anything, just put his arms around her and held her while she cried quietly. After a moment, she straightened, wiped her eyes, and nodded. They locked the front door one last time. Nancy placed the key on the hall table, the table she dusted every week, the table that held family photos she'd framed and arranged, and walked out. They drove away at 10 in the morning. In the rearview mirror, Nancy watched the mansion grow smaller, 25 years disappearing behind them. They had nowhere to go but the desert. John drove in silence, following the GPS coordinates from the property deed. The drive took them farther and farther from everything they knew, from the sprawling suburbs of Las Vegas, with its homes and stores and life, into increasingly barren landscape. The city gave way to scrubland, which gave way to true desert. Paved highways became state routes, which became county roads, which became dirt tracks barely visible against the hard-packed earth. The land was in an area northwest of the city, in a region where desert stretched for miles in every direction without interruption. No towns, no houses, no signs of human habitation at all, just endless brown earth under endless blue sky. Heat already shimmering off the ground, even though it was only March. When they finally reached their 40 acres, John pulled the truck over, and they both just stared through the windshield, neither one able to speak. It was worse than they'd imagined, so much worse. The land was absolutely flat, stretching to the horizon in every direction. The earth was cracked and dry, pale brown dust covering everything. A few dead bushes clung to existence, their branches brittle and gray. Rocks jutted from the ground randomly, sun-bleached white, and offering no shade, no shelter, no purpose. Not a tree anywhere, not a hint of water, not a building, not a road, not another human being in sight. Just 40 acres of nothing, surrounded by thousands more acres of the same nothing. The temperature outside was already 92 degrees, and it was only 11 in the morning. By afternoon, it would be over 100. At night, it would drop to near freezing. There was no protection from either extreme, no structure to provide shelter, nothing. "This is it," John said, his voice completely flat, drained of all emotion. "This is what 25 years of loyalty bought us, 40 acres of hell." Nancy got out of the truck slowly, her joints protesting after the long drive. Just crushing, absolute silence, broken only by the ticking of the truck's cooling engine. This land couldn't support life, any life, and yet they were supposed to live here. At 70 years old, with $3,000 and a truck, they were supposed to make this wasteland habitable. It was impossible. It was cruel. It was Marcus's final joke at their expense. Nancy felt something inside her crack. All the dignity she'd maintained, all the strength she'd forced herself to show, it crumbled. She sank to her knees in the dust, and for the first time since Richard's funeral, she sobbed. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. 25 years of her life given in service and loyalty, and this was her reward. Abandonment? Mockery. A death sentence disguised as a land deed. John came to her, kneeling beside her in the dust, wrapping his arms around her. He was crying too, silently, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. They held each other in that barren place, two elderly people facing the end of everything they'd known, everything they'd hoped for. "We're going to die here," Nancy whispered. "He sent us here to die." "Maybe," John said, his voice rough. "But if we die fighting. We don't give him the satisfaction of giving up." They set up camp that first night, working in the brutal heat. They'd stopped at a discount store on the way and bought what they could afford. A cheap tent, sleeping bags, a propane camp stove, bottles of water, canned food. The tent was poorly made, the kind meant for weekend camping trips, not permanent living, but it was all they had. Setting it up took an hour in the heat. By the time they finished, both were exhausted, drenched in sweat, dizzy from dehydration. They drank water sparingly. They had to make their supplies last, and had no idea when they could afford more. As the sun set, the temperature dropped rapidly. Desert nights were cold, sometimes near freezing even in spring. Nancy and John huddled in the tent in their sleeping bags, eating cold soup from cans, trying to figure out how they'd survive. "We need water first," John said. "We can live without a lot of things, but not water. I'll start digging tomorrow. Maybe I can hit groundwater. And if there's no groundwater, then we haul water from town, 20 miles each way. Our truck barely runs. We have almost no money for gas, but we'll figure it out." Nancy looked at the deed to the property, the paper that represented their entire net worth. Why would Richard's father buy this land? There must have been a reason. No one buys 40 acres of desert for no reason. Maybe he thought water would come here. Maybe he thought the area would develop. Doesn't matter now. It didn't develop. There's no water. There's nothing but us and our starriness. They slept poorly that night, waking frequently from the cold, from discomfort, from the sheer strangeness of their situation. At dawn, John started digging. He marked out a spot about 30 yards from where they'd set up the tent, far enough that if they did establish any kind of living area, a well would be appropriately distant. He had a shovel they'd bought at the discount store, cheap metal that bent slightly with each strike into the hard-packed earth. The ground was brutal. The top layer was loose dust, but beneath that was hardpan. Earth baked so hard by decades of sun that it was almost like concrete. Each shovelful required enormous effort. John was 68 years old. He'd maintained his strength by working as a groundskeeper. But this was different.
This was hour after hour of back-breaking labor in 95 degrees heat. By noon, he'd dug perhaps 3 feet down, and the hole was maybe 4 feet wide. He was soaked in sweat. His hands were blistering despite work gloves, and his back screamed with every movement. Nancy brought him water, made him rest in the shade of the truck. "You can't do this," she said. "You'll kill yourself. We need water. This is the only way. Then I'll help. We'll take turns." They worked in shifts through the afternoon, but Nancy's 70-year-old body couldn't handle the labor for more than 20 minutes at a time. Still, she tried. And together, they managed to get the hole to 4 feet deep before the sun got too low to work safely. That night, they were too exhausted to eat. They drank water, took aspirin for their aching muscles, and collapsed into sleep. On the third day, people from Dusty Springs started arriving. The town was small, maybe 300 people, and news traveled fast. Word had spread that some old folks were trying to live in the desert. People drove out to see if it was true, pulling up in trucks and SUVs, parking on the road, getting out to watch and point. "Look at them," one man in his 40s said loudly to his friend, clearly not caring if Nancy heard. "Old fools trying to dig a well by hand. They won't find water out here. This land's been dead for 50 years. A woman with 2 teenagers got out of her car and took pictures on her phone. "This is so sad," she said. But she was smiling. "Someone should call social services. They can't live like this." But no one called social services. No one offered to help. They just watched, entertained by the spectacle of 2 elderly people struggling to survive in conditions that would challenge someone half their age. Nancy felt humiliation burn through her worse than the sun. They'd become entertainment. Her joke. "Los vos de desectos," I heard someone say. The old people of the desert. A teenager laughed. The name stuck. By the end of the first week, Nancy and John were sunburned, exhausted, and running dangerously low on supplies. John had dug 5 feet down in his well attempt and found nothing but more dry earth. Their water supply was nearly gone. They had maybe $40 left after buying gas and food. They were objectively failing, and everyone knew it. On the 8th day, as John dug in the brutal morning sun, his shovel hit something that rang with a metallic sound. He stopped, confused. Metal out here. He was only 4 feet down, too shallow for any kind of infrastructure or utility lines. And there were no utilities out here anyway. Carefully, he cleared away more dirt, and there it was, a metal box, maybe a foot long and 8 inches wide, corroded at the edges, but intact. Engraved on the top, barely visible under years of tarnish, was a single word. John. His own name. John's hands started shaking. He called Nancy over, his voice strange. She came running, and together they stared at this impossible thing, a box buried in the desert with John's name on it. How? John pried the box out of the ground. It was heavy, well sealed despite its age. With trembling hands, he forced open the corroded latch. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth to protect against moisture, were several items. An envelope marked for Nancy and John, and handwriting Nancy recognized instantly, Richard Miller's careful script. Beneath the envelope was an old brass key with a tag reading, Nevada First Bank, Box 2847.
And beneath that were what looked like official documents, geological survey maps. Their colors faded, but still readable. John opened the envelope with shaking hands. The letter inside was dated 2 years before Richard's death. Nancy read it over his shoulder, and as the words sank in, they both stopped breathing. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. But Richard's handwriting was unmistakable, and as they read about lithium, about mineral surveys, about a fortune hidden beneath worthless desert, they understood. Richard had known. He'd known everything. He'd known his son would betray them, and he'd planned for this exact moment. He'd given them not just land, but justice. Nancy started laughing, first a small sound, almost a sob, then building into genuine laughter that echoed across the empty desert. John joined her, and they laughed until tears ran down their faces, sitting in the dirt beside a 4-foot hole, holding a letter from a dead man who'd protected them better than his own son ever could. The people from Dusty Springs, who'd driven out that day to watch Los Viejos fail, saw 2 elderly people laughing like maniacs in the heat. "They've lost it," one man said. "Sun got to them, sad." But Nancy and John weren't crazy. They were free. They'd found the treasure, and now the real work would begin. My dearest Nancy and John, if you are reading this letter, then I am gone, and I pray with all my heart that my plan has worked as I intended.
I know my son. I wish I didn't have to write those words with such sadness, but I do. I raised Marcus, watched him grow, tried to teach him the values that mattered to me, and somewhere along the way, I lost him to ambition, to greed, to a coldness I never wanted to see in my own child. I know he will never honor the verbal promises I made to you. I know this because I've seen how he conducts business, how he treats people he considers beneath him, how he values money over humanity. When I got sick, when I knew my time was limited, I made the decision to protect you in the only way that would work, not through my will. Marcus would have found a way around that, would have fought it, would have made your lives miserable with legal battles you couldn't afford to fight. No, I had to be more clever. I had to give you something he would never think to investigate, something he would dismiss as worthless, something he would hand to you with contempt rather than contest. So I'm giving you this land, and I'm telling you now what I never told my son, what I never told anyone except the private geological firm I hired 20 years ago. This desert land isn't worthless. Beneath your feet, if you're reading this, where I hope you are, lies something remarkable. 23 years ago, I commissioned a private geological survey of several properties I owned. This was during a time when I was diversifying my real estate investments, and I wanted to know what, if anything, my holdings might contain beyond that surface value. The survey of this particular 40 acres revealed something extraordinary. There is a deposit of lithium carbonate beneath this land, what they call white lithium. At the time, lithium was interesting but not particularly valuable. It was used in batteries for small devices in some medical applications, but the market was limited. The geological firm estimated the deposit at approximately 2.4 million metric tons, but with lithium trading at modest prices, it wasn't worth the expensive extraction. But I'm not a fool, Nancy and John. I've watched technology evolve for 60 years. I've seen how the world changes, how new innovations create new demands, how materials that seem commonless suddenly become precious, and I knew I was certain that electric vehicles would change everything, that batteries would become the heart of our energy future, that lithium would become more valuable than gold. So I waited. I bought this land for almost nothing. $12,000 for 40 acres of desert that everyone said was worthless. I never filed the mineral rights survey publicly. I kept it secret, locked in a safety deposit box, waiting. I knew that if I left you this land in my normal will, Marcus would investigate it. He's greedy enough to check every asset, smart enough to research mineral rights, ruthless enough to fight you for it if he discovered its value. So instead, I'm leaving it to you this way, hidden, buried, waiting for you to discover it like the treasure it is. The brass key in this box opens safety deposit box number 2847 at Nevada First Bank on Stewart Avenue in Las Vegas. Inside that box, you will find the original geological surveys, all mineral rights documentation properly filed and legally secured in your names, and contact information for a company called Future Tech Energy Solutions. 20 years ago, when I first discovered the lithium deposit, I contacted several energy companies to gauge their interest in future development. Future Tech was the most ethical, the most environmentally conscious, and the most patient. I explained to their CEO that I had a lithium deposit that might become available in the future under circumstances I couldn't yet predict. I asked if they would be willing to wait to sign a preliminary agreement that gave them first option to negotiate mineral rights if and when the property became available. They agreed. For 20 years, they've been waiting, checking in annually, ready to move forward the moment I gave them the signal. That signal was your ownership of this land. When you contact them, and I've left their information in the safety deposit box, they will be ready to negotiate immediately. They understand that you are not geologists or mining experts. They will offer fair terms, proper royalties, environmental protections. I've made sure of that. Nancy, John, you've given my family 25 years of loyalty, love, and service. You cared for my home like it was your own. You cared for me when I was dying like I was family. You showed my son more kindness than he ever showed you. This land, this fortune hidden beneath worthless desert is my thank you. My attempt to ensure that loyalty is rewarded, that faith is honored, that the people who spent their lives in service don't end their lives in poverty. But more than that, it's my revenge on my son's cruelty. I know Marcus. I know he will dismiss you, mock you, give you this land as an insult. I know he will laugh at your suffering, and I want him to learn what it costs to treat good people as disposable. Take this gift, use it well, build something beautiful, live the rest of your lives in comfort and security, knowing that your loyalty mattered, that your service was seen, that someone valued you properly, even if my son never could. Take care of each other. Be happy. You've earned every bit of this. With my deepest gratitude and my love, Richard Allen Miller. Nancy and John read the letter 3 times, then 4. Then they simply sat in the dust beside their pathetic 4-foot hole, holding this message from beyond the grave, and cried, not from sadness this time, from relief, from vindication, from the overwhelming knowledge that they hadn't been forgotten, hadn't been abandoned, hadn't been cast aside as worthless. Richard had seen them, had valued them, had protected them in the most clever, most complete way possible. He turned Marcus's cruelty into their salvation, had transformed the ultimate insult into the ultimate gift, had given them not just security, but justice. John started laughing first, a sound that started as a chuckle and built into deep rolling laughter that shook his entire body. Nancy joined him, and they laughed until they couldn't breathe, sitting in the Nevada desert with dust on their faces and blisters on their hands, holding a letter that changed everything. He knew, Nancy gasped between laughs. He knew exactly what Marcus would do, and he planned for it. $800 million, John said, looking at the geological survey maps. Richard left us $800 million in lithium under the land Marcus gave us as garbage.
It's perfect, Nancy said. It's absolutely perfect. Marcus will never know. He'll think he won. He'll think he destroyed us. And all the while we'll be sitting on a fortune. So what do we do? John asked. We don't tell anyone, Nancy said, her mind already working. Not yet. We go to the bank. We verify everything. We contact this energy company. We get lawyers. We make sure everything is airtight legally. But we don't tell Marcus. We don't tell the people from town. We keep looking poor and desperate, while we're actually millionaires, while we're actually building an empire. Nancy corrected. An empire that will prove loyalty matters, that will show Marcus what he threw away, that will honor Richard's faith in us. John looked at his wife of 47 years, at this woman who'd survived everything life threw at them, who was already planning their next move with the strategic mind Marcus had always underestimated. Richard chose well, he said. He trusted the right people. Yes, Nancy agreed. He did. Now, let's make sure we prove worthy of that trust. That night they still slept in their cheap tent, still ate canned soup on a camp stove, still looked to any casual observer like two desperate old people failing to survive in the desert. But everything had changed. They weren't victims anymore. They were victors waiting to reveal themselves, and the desert that was supposed to be their grave was about to become their kingdom. The next day, John drove their old truck to Nevada First Bank in Las Vegas, 2 hours away. He opened the safety deposit box with the brass key Richard had left. Inside, exactly as promised, were geological surveys, legal filings for mineral rights, and a business card for a company called Future Tech Energy Solutions, with a handwritten note. When you're ready, call this number. We've been waiting. R.M. John took everything, made copies at a print shop, secured the originals in the box, and drove back to the desert. That night in their tent, he and Nancy read through the surveys by flashlight. The reports were technical but clear. Beneath their 40 acres was an estimated deposit of 2.4 million metric tons of lithium carbonate, one of the purest concentrations ever found in Nevada. At current market prices, the deposit was worth approximately $800 million, and prices were rising as electrophysical production exploded. Nancy and John said in silence, absorbing the enormity of what they've been given. We need to be smart about this, Nancy finally said. If we suddenly look wealthy, Marcus will investigate. He's trying to take this from us. Then we look poor, John agreed. We live in the tent. We let people think we're desperate. Meanwhile, we negotiate the deal. Over the next weeks, they lived a double life. By day, they were the struggling old couple, barely surviving in the desert heat. Nancy would drive to the discount store in Dusty Springs, buying cheap supplies, looking poor and tired. John would dig his well slowly, performing poverty for anyone who came to watch. But at night, they made phone calls on a prepaid cell phone John bought. They spoke with lawyers in Las Vegas, with the representatives from Future Tech Energy Solutions, with mining consultants. They learned that they didn't have to mine the lithium themselves. They could lease the mineral rights to a company that would do the extraction, paying them royalties on every ton removed. With lithium prices soaring, those royalties could be worth tens of millions per year. The lawyers advised patience. Don't rush this, one told them. You have something every energy company in the world wants. Let them compete for it. Drive up your terms. So Nancy and John waited. They used $1,000 of their savings to hire a company to put up a chain link fence around their 40 acres, a broken-looking fence, but one that clearly already had property boundaries. When people from Dusty Springs asked why they were fencing worthless desert, John shrugged and said, "It's ours. We're protecting it." People laughed. Protecting what? Dirt. But the fence stayed up. Meanwhile, quietly, Nancy and John were conducting negotiations that would change their lives. They spoke with 4 different energy companies, all desperate for lithium. They let the companies bid against each other. They had lawyers review every word of every contract. And 2 months after finding Richard's letter, they signed a deal with Future Tech Energy Solutions for a 20-year mineral extraction lease. The terms were extraordinary. A signing bonus of $12 million paid immediately. A royalty of 8% on all lithium extracted and sold, estimated at $15 million minimum per year. Full environmental remediation treatment.
A geological journal published an article about the major lithium discovery in Nevada. It didn't name the exact location, but it mentioned the region. Within days, energy reporters were writing about the find. Industry analysts were projecting its impact on the electric vehicle market. Lithium prices jumped, and Marcus Miller, reading The Wall Street Journal in his Silicon Valley office, saw the article and felt something cold settle in his stomach. He remembered the land, the worthless desert land his father had owned, the land he'd given to the servants as a joke. With shaking hands, Marcus pulled up the deed records. The land was in Nancy and John Martinez's names. The land that was now sitting on top of an $800 million lithium deposit. Marcus felt the room spin. He'd thrown away a fortune. He'd given away what might be the most valuable land in Nevada because he'd been too arrogant to investigate, too cruel to care, too certain that his father would never leave anything valuable to servants. He immediately called his lawyer. "I need you to find a way to avoid a property transfer. I need that land back." The lawyer asked questions. When Marcus explained the situation, there was a long pause. "Mr. Familiar. If you voluntarily transferred property and the recipients discovered mineral wealth afterward, there's no legal basis to reclaim it. The land is theirs. There has to be something, a mistake in the deed, undue influence, something. I'll look into it, but I'll be honest. This will be difficult." Marcus hung up and sat in fury and panic. His tech investments had been underperforming. He'd been counting on the sale of his father's estate to fund his next venture, and he'd just given away the biggest fortune he'd ever had a chance at. He had to get that land back, whatever it took. 3 days later, Marcus Miller drove to the Nevada desert, determined to intimidate Nancy and John into returning his land. What he found there would haunt him for the rest of his life. Marcus's GPS led him down increasingly rough roads until he reached the area where he'd sent Nancy and John to die. He expected to find them broken, desperate, maybe already gone. Instead, he found a gate, a serious gate, steel, electronic with a guard house and uniformed security. A sign read, "Private Property, Desert Bloom Resource Management. No trespassing." Marcus pulled up to the gate, confused. The security guard approached. "Can I help you, sir? I'm looking for Nancy and John Martinez there. They should be on some land around here." The guard checked a tablet. "Do you have an appointment with Mrs. Martinez?" "An appointment? I don't need an appointment. I'm Marcus Miller. That land was my father's. I need to speak with them." "One moment, sir." The guard made a call. Marcus waited. Irritation building. Who did these people think they were? Finally, the guard returned. "Mrs. Martinez says, you can come in. Follow the road to the main building." The gate opened and Marcus drove through. His confusion deepening. The road was paved, professionally paved. On either side were young trees, newly planted, and landscaping that must have cost a fortune. And then he saw it. Where there should have been a tent and dying old people, there was a complex, a beautiful modern building, the main residence clearly, with solar panels and contemporary architecture. Beyond it, he could see industrial structures, vehicles, people working in uniforms. This wasn't a desert camp. This was a facility, a professional operation. Marcus parked and got out. His mind reeling. How was this possible? A woman approached from the main building. For a moment, Marcus didn't recognize her. Then he did. Nancy, but not the Nancy he dismissed 8 months ago. This Nancy wore an elegant business suit. Her hair was professionally styled. She moved with confidence, accompanied by 2 men in suits who were clearly lawyers. "Hello, Marcus," she said calmly. "This is unexpected." "What? What is all this?" Marcus gestured at the complex. "This is our home and our business. Would you like to come inside? We should talk privately." Marcus followed, too shocked to argue. Inside, the house was stunning. Modern furniture, art on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the desert that somehow looked beautiful now, not barren. Nancy led him to an office. John sat behind a desk, also dressed professionally, also unrecognizable from the broken man Marcus had dismissed. "Please sit," Nancy said. "Can we offer you anything? Water? Coffee?" "I don't want coffee." Marcus snapped, finding his voice. "I want to know what the hell is going on. This land was worthless. You were supposed to be dying, suffering, broken," Nancy finished. "Yes, I suppose we were. Except your father had other plans." She handed Marcus a folder. "These are copies. You can read them if you like. Your father knew you'd betray us, Marcus. He knew you'd dismiss us without honoring his promises. So he made other arrangements." Marcus opened the folder with shaking hands. Inside were the geological surveys, Richard's letter, and the executed lease agreement with Future Tech Energy Solutions. As he read, the color drained from his face. "This isn't possible. This land can't be worth $800 million in lithium reserves." Nancy said, "It is, and it's ours. Legally, completely, irreversibly ours. Your father made sure of that." "No." Marcus stood up, panic overriding shock. "No, you can't have this. This land was part of my father's estate. You manipulated him. We worked for your father for 25 years, John said quietly. We were loyal when you weren't. We cared for him when you didn't. And he rewarded that loyalty by giving us what you would have squandered, just like you're squandering everything else. I'll sue. I'll prove you manipulated him. You'll lose." One of the lawyers said, "We've already reviewed every possible challenge. The transfer was legal, documented, and uncontestable. Mrs. Martinez and Mr. Martinez are the rightful owners. Period." Marcus looked at Nancy, at the woman who'd raised him, who he'd called Tia, who he'd thrown away like garbage. "Please," he said, his voice breaking. "I need this. My investments aren't doing well. The money from my father's estate isn't enough. If you have any compassion." Nancy stood up and walked to her desk. She pulled out a checkbook and wrote a check, then handed it to Marcus. He looked at it. $1,000. "What is this?" "That's what you're worth to us," Nancy said coldly. "For every year we served your family $40. It's more than you gave us. You can't be serious. This mine is worth hundreds of millions. And we earned it," Nancy said, her voice hard. "Through loyalty, through patience. Through 25 years of service, you never appreciated. Your father left this to us because we deserved it and you didn't. My father was senile. He didn't know what he was doing. Your father, John said, standing, was brilliant. He knew exactly what he was doing. He was punishing you for being the kind of man who'd throw away people who loved you. And that punishment is watching us succeed with what you thought was worthless. I'll fight this. I'll take this to court. I'll do whatever you want," Nancy said. "We have lawyers. We have the law on our side, and we have something you'll never have. The moral high ground. Now, please leave our property." "Our property?" Marcus laughed bitterly. "Your servants. You'll always be servants." "No," Nancy said quietly. "We're survivors. We're business people. We're the owners of one of the most valuable lithium deposits in North America. And you're the man who threw it all away because you couldn't see value in loyalty. Now get out of our home. The lawyers stood. The security guards appeared at the door. Marcus realized he had no power here, none at all. He'd entered thinking he could intimidate desperate old people. Instead, he'd found an empire, and he owned none of it. As security escorted him out, he passed workers in hard hats, trucks moving materials, a professional operation humming with activity. Everything he could have had, everything he'd thrown away. At the gate, the guard handed him something. Mrs. Martinez asked me to give you this. It was the deed, the original deed Marcus had thrown across the desk 8 months ago. On it, Nancy had written, "We cared for your family for 25 years. Now the earth will care for us. Learn from this." Nancy and John Martinez. Marcus drove away, and through his rearview mirror, he could see the complex growing smaller. His father's final lesson, his own greatest failure, the price of cruelty. He never recovered financially. His tech ventures failed. He had to sell his father's mansion for less than expected. Within 2 years, he'd lost everything. But Nancy and John, they thrived. 5 years after being thrown into the desert to die, Nancy and John Martinez were featured in a business magazine profile titled "From Servants to CEOs, The Desert Bloom Story." The article detailed their unlikely rise, their partnership with future tech energy solutions, and their commitment to environmental responsibility in lithium extraction. The facility employed 120 people now, many from Dusty Springs and surrounding communities. Nancy and John paid well above minimum wage, offered full benefits, and created profit-sharing programs. The same people who'd called them Los Vicos del Deserto now worked for them. And Nancy treated every employee with the respect she'd never received from Marcus. They'd also established a foundation to help elderly workers who'd been dismissed from long-term employment without proper compensation. They funded legal aid, housing assistance, and job retraining. Hundreds of people received help every year. "We know what it's like to have your loyalty mean nothing," Nancy told the magazine. "We're making sure others don't suffer the same way we did." They still lived simply despite the wealth. The house in the desert, comfortable and beautiful, but not ostentatious. They drove nice but not flashy cars. They gave generously but quietly. And they never forgot Richard Miller's last gift to them. Not just the land, but the validation that their 25 years of service had mattered to someone. They visited his grave regularly, bringing flowers, saying thank you. One afternoon, Nancy stood at Richard's headstone alone. "You saved us," she said quietly. "You saw value in us when your son saw nothing. You made sure loyalty was rewarded. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Well, make sure your faith in us was justified." As she turned to leave, she saw a figure standing by a car in the distance. Marcus. He looked older, worn. Their eyes met across the cemetery. Nancy could have been cruel. Could have savored his downfall. Instead, she just felt sad. She nodded once, acknowledgement, not reconciliation, and walked back to where John was waiting. "Was that him?" John asked. "Yes. What do you feel?" Nancy thought about it. Pity and gratitude that were not him. They drove back to their desert home, where the sunset painted the sky orange and gold, where their impossible oasis bloomed in the midst of harsh land, where they'd built an empire from dirt and devotion. That evening, they sat on their patio, watching the desert they'd transformed. Workers were finishing their shifts, waving goodbye as they left. Lights twinkled across the facility. In the distance, the lithium extraction operation hummed quietly, pulling wealth from the earth that had almost been their grave. "Do you miss the old life?" John asked. "The mansion. The simplicity of just working for someone else." Nancy smiled. "Not for a second. We spent 25 years invisible, forgotten, except when they needed something. Now we're free. We're seen. We matter. We always mattered." John said. "Richard saw that. He did, and he made sure we'd be okay. The question is, what do we do with this gift? How do we honor it?" They talked late into the night, planning the foundation's next project, discussing employee benefits, dreaming about how to use their wealth to help others the way Richard had helped them. And the next morning they woke up in their desert palace and got to work. Two elderly people who'd refused to die in the dust, who'd turned abandonment into empire. Who'd proven that loyalty and patience and quiet strength could triumph over cruelty and arrogance. The desert that was supposed to be their grave had become their garden. And they tended it carefully, gratefully, knowing that some gifts come wrapped in hardship, that some treasures are hidden in the most unlikely places, and that the people you dismiss as worthless might be the ones who end up owning everything you threw away. If this story moved you, leave one word in the comments. And remember, never underestimate those who've worked in silence their whole lives, because their desert might become your greatest regret. Loyalty matters, character matters. Hand karma is patient, but it always arrives. The years that followed proved Richard Miller's faith justified. Nancy and John built not just a business, but a legacy. Desert Bloom Resource Management became a model for ethical mineral extraction, employing over 200 people within 5 years. All paid fair wages with profit-sharing programs that made many of them wealthy in their own right. The facility expanded carefully, maintaining environmental standards that exceeded federal requirements. Nancy insisted on that. They would not destroy the desert to extract its wealth. They worked with biologists, hydrologists, environmental engineers to ensure extraction caused minimal impact. The surrounding land actually improved under their stewardship. They planted thousands of native plants, established wildlife corridors, created what ecologists called a miracle of desert restoration, and they never forgot where they came from. The foundation they established helped hundreds of elderly workers betrayed by employers. They funded legal battles, provided housing, offered job training. Every person who came to them, desperate and dismissed, found help, found dignity, found justice. Marcus Miller disappeared from public life. His tech ventures collapsed. He lost everything. Some said he moved to another state, starting over with nothing. Finally learning what his father had tried to teach him too late. Nancy and John never spoke of him. They'd moved beyond revenge into something better. Purpose, peace, and the knowledge that they'd honored Richard's trust. On their 50th wedding anniversary, they stood on the observation deck of the main facility looking out at their desert empire. "Do you think Richard knows?" Nancy asked. "For knows we did it right. I think he knew before he died." John said that's why he trusted us with this. Nancy smiled, took her husband's hand, and looked at the sunset painting the desert gold. They'd survived abandonment, humiliation, and the cruelty of someone they'd cared for, and they'd turned it all into something beautiful. The desert that was supposed to be their death had become their life. And that was the greatest victory of all.